The content you're about to enjoy comes from the archives of The Best You. We're devoted to the very best in personal development, with a platform and resources dedicated to inspiring and changing people's lives. At The Best You, we work with the world's leading writers and trainers on the evolution of the self, and people whose journeys have been affected by their work and words. For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co. John Amaechi. John is an English psychologist, consultant, and retired basketball player. He played college basketball at Vanderbilt and Penn State and professional basketball in the NBA. Amaechi played 28 games for the Cleveland Cavaliers during 1995 and 1996, and then played 2 years in Europe. He returned to the USA, signing for the Orlando Magic, and Amaechi was known for turning down a $70 million contract offer from the LA Lakers in 2000, opting to remain in Orlando for $600,000 a year. Amaechi went to play for Utah Jazz between 2001 and 2003, and he now works as a psychologist, a consultant, establishing his company Amaechi Performance Systems, where he helps high-achieving individuals as well as medium to large-size organizations looking for an edge. In February 2007, he became the first former NBA player to come out publicly after doing his own memoir, Man in the Middle. Since then, he has been regarded as one of the world's most high-profile gay athletes. Well, my work with him, it was an honor to interview John. I mean, the career that he's had, the players that he's played with, the life he's had. He's a very large man, but he's a very inspiring one. And to have the opportunity to interview someone like him, especially as you know, I'm a big, massive fan of sports and athletes like him. It was a phenomenal opportunity. So I have no doubt you're going to love this interview. Thank you so much. Hi, welcome. I'm Bernardo Moya. And today I have the great pleasure of interviewing John Amaechi, who is an organizational consultant, psychologist, and former NBA star.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where were you born and your early years, please?
I was actually born in Boston through no great effort of my own. My mother, though she was from Hyde, was working at Boston General Hospital as a doctor. And I was born there, lived in Boston, I think, for 3 years. I have almost no memories of that. And then very quickly we came back to Manchester, which is where I spent, outside of my time in America, much of my life.
And what was school like for you? And did you enjoy it?
No, I hated school. I mean, ironic, really, because I loved to learn things and I loved to read things. But then despite that kind of being the prototype for the perfect student, I think I hated the actual school experience, the didactic methods, but also just the fact that I didn't fit anywhere I went. I grew up in, I say Manchester because it's easier for people to, but I grew up in Stockport, which is actually South Manchester, little town on its own. And I was definitely the only person who looked like this. I was massive when I was in primary school. I was massive when I was in secondary school. I think I was the only black kid in my primary school, one of two in my secondary school. And it just, everywhere I went, I didn't quite fit in.
Was there any subjects in particular that you stood out, you liked, you enjoyed?
It was, I lived in the bad old days, I think, before there was this breadth of subjects that you can take. So I think biology was about my favorite subject, probably for all the same reasons I love psychology. It's it's science, but it's not quite as, I'm sure pure biologists are freaking out when I say this, but it doesn't seem quite as pure as physics, for example, which I just never really got my head around. So I really enjoyed biology, learning how, the human body, how systems work. It really, it intrigued me even back then.
And tell me about your parents, because you said you were born in the US and then you came. Mm-hmm. Tell me about them.
My father was Nigerian. My mother, again, from Hyde in the northwest of England. I don't know very much about them as a couple because we left America when they split. And so after that point, it was just my two sisters, myself, and my mum. When we first moved back, we actually stayed with my grandparents. And my grandmother was a lovely, warm, amazing person, much like my mother. And my granddad was less so, shall we say. So for most of my life, it was just my mum, my two sisters, and me.
And was there anybody that helped you, that inspired you in those early years?
My mum was amazing. She was the person. We were quite... I think because of my mother's experience of splitting in her relationship, living elsewhere and then coming back home and feeling isolated, I think, again, having to start all over again in terms of her promotion through the medical stages, we were quite isolated. We stayed to ourselves. I knew one or two people from my street, but that's about it. The truth is my inspiration was always my mum.
That's nice. So when you finished in studying, what happened next? What was your next move?
I did my O-levels, did well in them. Did my A-levels, did less well in them. But I'd already decided at that point, I'd discovered basketball at age about 17. And I'd already decided that I was going to go to America and play in the NBA. The best basketball league in the world, and that's what I was going to do. Despite not really being interested in exercise, that was my vision, and I wanted to follow it through. So immediately after my A-levels, we'd already selected a high school to go to. I ended up without very many choices, actually, because back then the idea of an English kid going to America to do anything, never mind to play their sport, was a bit inconceivable to them. But I did find one coach in Toledo, Ohio, which is another one of those places that, unless you know America, you just have no idea where that even is. And he decided to give me a shot. So after school, I went straight to America. I went to high school for one more year, not really for the education, unless you count the kind of acculturation. Because, what I knew of America was essentially what I learned from the A-Team and Knight Rider. And that's what I expected. And then you get to America, and it's just everything about it is vast. I landed in Chicago for my connection to Toledo, Ohio, and it struck me that I was in this hot place, and I knew it was hot because you touched the glass, and outside it was just boiling, but it was cold. My first experience of air conditioning, and then everywhere I looked, people were eating plates of food that were just massive, and the scale of America and the excess of America just really struck me. Or maybe it was the fact how little I thought we had in comparison. But that was my first kind of introduction.
So when you decided to go to college, so you started into playing basketball in this college. Was that the start of your career as a sportsman, as an MBA?
High school is where it starts. My high school experience was really informative. My high school had 4,000 people come and watch the basketball games. So these are, 16, sometimes 15, but 16, 17-year-old people, high school level playing basketball, and there are 4,000 people in the stands, grown-ups watching you play. There's a section of the newspaper that covers high school sports, and not in tiny, kind of box score, but in detail. So you suddenly realize that even at that stage, you're kind of almost a semi-professional athlete at that stage, because you already know that you're competing. I remember distinctly there was a kid in the same conference that I was in, and he was 6'9", and I knew we were competing for a scholarship, and I knew that without that scholarship I would have to go home in disgrace. So it felt very professional even at that point.
And how old were you then?
18 years old, that year of high school. A little older than most high schoolers, but that's the extra year added on, which was essential because I just wasn't good enough to get a scholarship up until that point. And it really wasn't until the end of the last half of the season in high school that I got good enough to get a scholarship anyway. And
what happened next? So you got your scholarship. Where did you move to?
I got a scholarship with Vanderbilt University, which is an eminent university, very good experimental psychology program, actually. I picked it because it was the perfect level of basketball for me, an average basketball team in a very good conference. But also I picked it because there was this crossover with this great psychology program. Unfortunately, my calculations didn't quite work out in that the coach of that team, halfway through the season, came to me, actually, and my roommate, and told us both that we weren't good enough. Told us both that we should drop down and play in a lower division if we were really serious about playing time. And neither of us believed him. We both knew that we could play in the NBA. And in fact, we both did end up playing in the NBA. And so I left Vanderbilt and went to Penn State. And I chose Penn State because everywhere else I went, coaches lied to me in the nicest possible way. They told me, you're going to be great. Your future's rosy. You're going to make millions of dollars, as they would say. You're going to be all this and all that. And I just couldn't believe any of them. I thought it was incredible. And so then I went to Penn State, and a coach sat me down in the oldest and least attractive of all the gyms, arenas that I'd been in. And he said, if you work really hard, we'll work with you and make you as good as you can possibly be. And I was like, that's the man. He's the only one who hasn't lied.
John, so then when you got your scholarship, then you moved to Penn State. Tell me about those years and what was that like?
Penn State was amazing on a number of levels. One, I again found a great university with actually a really good occupational, organizational psychology department, as well as a great child psychology department. But on top of that, I found a coach who was just an absolute straight shooter and who was really interested in people who were willing to work to develop. So it was just like this perfect combination. And I still didn't, I still didn't love the idea of having to constantly exercise, but it was part of the job. And once you're a college athlete in America, you suddenly realize it is a job then, because the money involved in the sport is huge. The Final Fours of basketball in any given year, especially now, gains more marketing dollars than any other sporting event outside of the FIFA World Cup. That's how big it is. And you suddenly realize that there's just millions of dollars based on whether you have a good game or not. And so it was a real commitment. Yet at the same time, I found myself just in this perfect spot to perform as well as I possibly could. I loved the academic side of it. I made some very good friends who are still very good friends to this day. And I really enjoyed getting involved in every part of school life that I could, from student governance all the way through. I just thought, I'm here, I'm in this foreign place. I should have my fingers in every pie if possible.
And from what I gather, obviously kind of studying psychology was important to you from your early years.
Yeah. I mean, basketball was a relatively late thing for me. I discovered basketball when I was 17, but I knew I'd be a psychologist when I was 7. So...
What was that?
Because, I mean, long story short, I thought my mother was a Jedi. Because in 1977, which was when I was 7... The original Star Wars came out. And I used to go on visits with my mother. She was a general practitioner. And I would watch as she sat in living rooms with distraught families. And she did a lot of palliative care. So these were often families where whoever was sick was not going to get better. And I would watch as she delivered information, disseminated information for sure. But really, she played more of what I thought was like a psychiatrist role. Helping them be resilient and helping them cope. And all of this within this tiny window of 8 minutes or so that she had for all of these number of visits she had to do every day. And she used to do this thing where she would wave her hands at people when they objected or, no, you can do this. This is what you're going to do. And then I'll see you in a week. And then they would parrot back what she'd just said. And I thought nothing of it until I saw Star Wars for the first time. And then about, 35 minutes into Star Wars, there's that scene where Obi-Wan Kenobi tells the stormtroopers, these aren't the droids you're looking for. And I sat in the room, in the theater with my mother, and I just stared at her mouth wide open because I'm like, that's what you do. And she looks at me in the theater in this darkness, and she just kind of nods at me. And I think she was just acknowledging me. But to me, at 7 years old, it was like, that was validation. Yes, I am a Jedi.
She has the Force.
Exactly. So I thought, if she's a Jedi, I must be a Jedi, obviously. And so I went to a library to find out how I how I kind of became a Jedi. And the librarian said to me that what I'm talking about sounds like psychology.
Yeah, that's another story.
Yeah.
That's great. That's brilliant. So even from your early years when you were at Penn State, you already became a motivational speaker for and supporting the youth. Is that what you were doing?
I mean, it's kind of, I hate the term motivational speaker. I always think it's kind of, it's like salesman. It's just the worst possible label. Yeah. I mean, psychologists, if they're not too precious about the art, right? If we don't get too hung up on how brilliant certain disciplines within psychology are because of their, convoluted and complicated methodology. The truth is, we help by creating a space where we talk with clarity, listen with openness, and connect with people authentically. So I like to consider that what I do when I talk to people is not bouncing up and down a stage, pumping my fists and yelling woo as loud as I can. I think if you are authentic and connect with people, you can actually have like a little, without putting too much into this, is a little group therapy session where people actually get to connect with somebody who really cares. And as an athlete, you certainly, in America, certainly, you find you have this amazing power as a college athlete. Your pictures are on the front of magazines that go national. Everywhere you go, people treat you like a rock star. Everywhere you go, a kid is shocked and surprised if you take 2 seconds to look at them and smile and nod. And I saw the impact that had on kids when I looked at them and smiled and nodded. I visited a couple of schools because I knew some teachers, and I saw the impact on kids. They couldn't believe that I'd actually bothered to show, how do you have time for us, someone like me? And when you see that impact, it's addictive.
And what were you doing then at Penn State? What was your story then? What did you have to share with others?
I mean, I think there are lots of archetypal stories that my story fits and therefore resonates with other people. But, if you're of a certain age, if you're a young person, really between 8 or 9 through teenage years, you often feel displaced. You often feel like you don't really belong. And as I said to you, I felt my entire school experience that I was a stranger in a strange land. And then here I am, an Englishman in America, and not in New York or anywhere cosmopolitan necessarily, but in central Pennsylvania. I'm as juxtaposed as you could be to that. And so the idea of being a stranger in a strange land really resonated with a lot of these people who I thought I had nothing in common with. Initially, on the surface of it, these almost exclusively white kids with blonde hair and blue eyes and what are they called? Mullets, driving trucks and taking time off school for hunting season. It's just like, this is the antithesis of me as a person. And yet, authentically, we resonated because even for them, they would go into school and feel like they didn't fit. They look at the wider world and realize that the wider world looked at them in quite a pejorative way, even the wider America. And as such, we could tell each other stories that really made sense.
So from Penn State, what happened next? You eventually got to the NBA.
I did. At the end of my career at Penn State, I was an All-American. I did very, very well. I was never the prototypical body for an NBA player. That's, I suppose, people who naturally have 4% body fat, whereas I held at 4% body fat by just unbelievable discipline and starving myself and working out 8 hours a day. It wasn't fun. I didn't get drafted, which is the way you normally get your place. I wasn't selected, so I had to go through this really convoluted summer program with essentially my agent and me begging teams to give me a chance. The team that gave me a chance was Cleveland, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I went to their summer program, which is where 25 or 30 athletes who are hoping to get their start in the NBA but haven't been selected, it's called a free agency camp, work out together. Of those, 3 of them will make it through to the preseason camp, where all the guys who are currently on contract, which is normally between 12 and 14, will work out with these 3 new people, knowing that at the end of the season, there is space for 12 players. And I went through that process with Cleveland, really kicked it out of the park in the free agent camp. because I'd really worked hard on my body and worked hard on my skills. Did well through the preseason camp, and then did really well in the preseason games, and found myself starting, being a first-team player, starting for the Cleveland Cavaliers at the beginning of the season, which was unprecedented. No one has ever been, prior to me, no one had ever been an undrafted player who'd started at the beginning of the season. So I was quite pleased that I managed to.
And English.
Yeah, well, I mean, no one at that point, no one English had ever played in the NBA.
Yes, exactly.
So it was quite. It's quite nice to kind of, at least, however fleeting my time, just 6 or 7 years, at least I notched up a couple of things that can't be taken away.
To find out more about our latest projects, get a free coaching lesson, or download my book, go to www.bernardo-moya.com.
How old were you then?
I have no idea. I went through college with this 95, so that makes me 24, 25, 24 going into that season. Yeah.
Is that kind of is that the age when...
No, I was a little bit older.
You were a bit older.
Than normal, but that's because I did the extra year for high school, without which I would not have been good enough to get a scholarship. And then the rules for transferring within Division 1 in America are, for basketball at least, if you transfer, you have to then sit out a year. So it's really designed to stop you from wanting to transfer. I had no choice. So I transferred to Penn State, spent a year where I could only practice. Talk about delay of gratification. A year when I could only practice. And then I had my 3 years of remaining eligibility, which means there's an extra year tagged on there.
Oh, that's commitment, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it wasn't. The actual act of the commitment was difficult, and every day was kind of a decision to do that. But remembering to be committed was not hard, because I realized that I had left everything for this. Being in America, once you've done it for a few months, being in America, whilst it has many, many amazing positive things, so many great things about America, it's not a holiday. Once you've been there for a while and you're really working that hard. And I know I left my mum behind. I'd left my sisters behind. My mother had been in remission with cancer, and the news came my sophomore year, my second year at Penn State, that the cancer had come back. And so every day I'm thinking, I can't waste my time here, because all my time here is time away from my mum. These are all days. Every day was a day that I, at some point, will lament not having with my mother. It makes it a lot easier to focus on lifting weights and running around tracks and shooting basketballs.
Absolutely. So then, did you move to Orlando Magic afterwards? Was that the next move?
No, actually, I had to. After my first year with Cleveland, I signed a 2-year contract with them. After my first year with Cleveland, they would have me back. But the truth was, I just wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough as a player. And I knew that if I stayed in the NBA, which is what I wanted to do for ego purposes, 2 things would be true. 1, I wouldn't be maximizing income for a job that has an average career length of just less than 3 years. And 2, I knew I wouldn't get exponentially better, which is what I needed to do in order to be more than an average NBA player. And so instead I went to Europe. And I did I found the best team in Europe. I quite literally went to the European champions and played on essentially an all-star team in Greece for a team called Panathinaikos. I still have Greek people in London yelling at me through their car windows in a nice way, for a change, actually. And I played for them and got, I played every minute. And really had a chance to work on my game in game situations against the best competition in Europe, which is not as good as the NBA, but still very good. The year after that, I went, I don't know where I went. Did I go to...
Was it Bologna?
I think, no, I went to, yes, that's right, Kinder Bologna. And then, another team that was a European champion or thereabouts, a chance to work on my game. And every summer I came back and I did that same grueling... give me a chance, begging teams to give me a shot because I'm a different, better player now. And every year I did that for 2, 3, 4 years before I finally got my shot with Orlando. which was a rare one because Doc Rivers was a first-year coach with a team that was supposed to be terrible, and he took a risk with me where he needn't have. But I have to say, it is a risk that made him look like a genius because I came in that season, played amazingly well, and people were like, oh, well, the reason he's so good is because Doc's a genius. In fact, Doc Rivers, the coach, ended up getting Coach of the Year that year. Not because of me, but because of the entire team performed in a way that nobody expected. But there you go, in a nutshell, what happens if you've got a coach who creates a team culture that really allows people to be more than they are as individuals. That Gestalt thing really happened for us.
Well, it's funny, but especially I think with the NBA, I mean, normally it would be the other way around. People would probably finish their careers in Europe, wouldn't they? I mean, you decided to do completely the opposite.
Well,
prepare yourself.
In fairness, great players might finish their career in Europe or in China even nowadays. But I was not a great player. I was a player who needed to get much, much better in order to make my impact in the league. And it was, again, I mean, delay of gratification seems to have been some kind of theme in my life. The truth is that I could have stayed in the league, notched up years just by being good enough to be that 10, 11, 12th guy. Or I could spend 3 years in Europe, 4 years in Europe, 3 I think, and end up being good enough to come back and be one of the top 5 guys on every team. And sometimes one of the top 3 or 2, certainly in Orlando, one of the top 3 or 2.
How did you improve your game?
I mean, getting better at any skill, including basketball, is always about, A, knowing what you're good at, which not everybody is good at ascertaining, identifying your weaknesses, and then the really difficult part is working on the things you're not good at, not the things you are good at. In basketball, and this is similar in many areas, people love to repeat and work on the things that they're already very good at. And I had to be really disciplined. I'm really good at this move and this move and this move, but I can't really dribble with my right hand, for example. So it takes a lot more effort when you're so accomplished at doing other things to really focus on the things that you do poorly, especially because nobody who's really good likes to feel inadequate, even if they're on their own. And I got really good at focusing on, right, this summer, there are things I do fantastically, which will get cursory attention over the course of the summer. Every day I'll do something with it, but it'll be cursory. Then I have this group of things that I worked on last summer that I'm not yet totally proficient at, but are still good enough for game, but they're not great. Those things will get a lot of attention, the bulk of the attention. And then there'll be one last set of things, which are the things that I am absolutely, abjectly terrible at this stage, but would be really useful to have in a year's time. And those things will also get a good bunch of attention. And that way you go into the next season with a new set of skills that are polished to go along with your already polished skills. And you've got another set of skills that are good enough for a game in an emergency, if needs must, but aren't your go-to stuff. But also this new set of things that you're working on that you were terrible at, now suddenly move into the next column for the next summer. And the next summer, they are things that are okay for a game but not polished. And now you can polish those and start looking for the next thing that you can do to make yourself better. Because the truth is that in everything, it doesn't matter if it's sport or industry or whatever, or school, education, there's always someone younger and potentially brighter, more talented coming in the next year to take your job. So if you have the same set of skills as you had last year, somebody new can take you. And I didn't want that to happen.
So a lot of planning, a lot of strategy, and I suppose visualizing and seeing where you wanted to go and what you wanted to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to have a very clear image of what it is you're trying to achieve. In literature, in science fiction, I read, especially as a kid, but even now, read a lot of science fiction. And there's this concept called a future history. The idea that in a book, for example, Asimov, he describes the future in such a way that it sounds like he's actually recalling something from memory. It's not like it's a fantasy that he's thrown out there with sparse detail. He's telling the story on the page so vividly that it appears in your brain like you're experiencing it. And I think if you want to do something off the beaten track, if you want to do something that other people have not paved the way for in the past, the only way you have a shot is if you can visualize, warts and all, a picture of what it's like in that kind of detail. I mean, even as I was practicing before I even got to the NBA, before I got to college, I knew how my body might feel after a game in terms of, because essentially after a game, you go and sit in an ice bath for 15 minutes, because if you don't, you can't move the next day. And I knew about this because I'd already kind of envisioned it. And so it made very practical my experience.
Very interesting. So Orlando Magic, you were there for 3 years?
Yep, 3 years.
And would you say that was your pinnacle? Was that the
Orlando Magic was certainly my heyday.
Yeah.
Although my heyday was not, super high in the scheme of things. I was certainly an above average player there, that's for sure.
And then you got an offer from LA Lakers.
Yes.
For $17 million, which you turned down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
It wasn't for reasons of nobility or whatever. I know people will start thinking of Raheem Sterling or something at this point, and it's not any of those reasons. It was simply that the Orlando Magic was the team that gave me my shot when nobody else, just much like Cleveland, when nobody else would give me a shot to show them how good I could be. They were there and they gave me that long shot opportunity. And I am one of those people who bangs on all the time about being a person of principle. And normally that is only tested when, I don't know, the last Danish is on the shelf at the supermarket and you let the nice elderly woman have it instead of you taking it. Or the last seat on the bus or the tube and you let the pregnant lady take it instead of you. And you suddenly feel this flush of accomplishment and I'm a noble, principled person. And that's great. But the problem is sometimes if you bang on about principles, it'll actually be tested in a way that is real and meaningful. And in a way that everything you've ever wanted is placed on one side of the scale and your word is placed on the other. And so that's what happened. So it wasn't for Orlando that I did it. It was for me. It was because in some part I knew I was going to, obviously I'd studied to be a psychologist. I started my master's when I was in college. I completed my work while I was playing, my study while I was playing. I knew I was going to be a psychologist, and I knew that fundamentally what makes us powerful is our authenticity and the fact that we can be trusted implicitly. Without those two things, it doesn't matter how clever your scheme, it can't work. And now I know when I work with people and they ask me if I can be trusted and they ask me if I can, they can disclose things to me that will be kept sacred. They know, if they look into my background at all, what my word is worth. And when Orlando came back and said, look, we know you've got better offers, but we're asking you to stay with us. We gave you a shot and we'd like you to return that favor. They know what my word is worth. And it's, 17 million quid.
No regrets.
Of course. I mean, I would love to have the championship rings that I knew would come. I knew they would win championships and a ton of them, and they did. What was it, 4 or 5 championships they won in that period that I would have played there? The money would have been great.
Was it Michael Jordan you would have had the opportunity to play?
No. It would have been the Lakers at that time.
At that time, yes, of course, he was.
Were Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant in their prime. Frankly, I wouldn't have had to play. I'd been able to just sit on the bench and win 5 championships. I knew that. But my word is more important.
Admirable. What does it take to be an NBA sportsman? Because it obviously comes across very glamorous, but it's very demanding and can be very destroying and self-destroying, I suppose. I mean, what does it take to be an NBA?
A great tolerance for mundanity. Much like being good at anything, being great at anything, you just have to endure extensive periods of mundanity. And I don't think people realize, because people watch the games and they watch us arrive and they watch the fact that we have our own planes, not each of us as individuals, but teams have their own planes and we have nice cars often. And they think, this is what being in the NBA is about, but it's really not. Being in the NBA really starts with, after the game, you get into the locker room and you've got 10 minutes to shower before the media can come in and ask you any question they want. You know that after that period, half of your team who didn't play enough minutes You don't play about 25, 30 minutes a game. You run a risk of losing your edge. We'll have to go into another side locker room, get on a bike or a treadmill, and run for 45 minutes. And if you did play enough minutes, all of us guys are sat in a row in our own individual ice baths, chattering teeth. Then we go home, we eat some food, and we fall asleep. And you wake up the next day, and you have to stretch. And it sounds simple, but 100 games a year, stretching gets to be a challenge. You go to the gym, you do your weights, you do your yoga, you practice for 2 hours. You eat some food, you come back, you practice for an hour on your own. You sleep, and it's just repeat.
Hotel rooms, don't know where you are.
Yeah, I mean, that, one of the most disconcerting, it seems really trite, but one of the most disconcerting things that happened was there comes a point of the season where you wake up and you feel utterly disoriented because you're looking around and they're all beautiful hotel rooms and you have your own room. And you look around and you have no idea where you are, and you are reaching into your own brain to try and remember what day of the week is it. We landed at 2 a.m. What city did we land in? And that's all in the process. 10 o'clock in the morning, maybe, if you've had a really late night flight in. That's all in the process of knowing you have to eat breakfast and probably play again at 2. It's really disconcerting. So, I mean, that's what it really takes. Are you willing to, I have this narrative where I talk about paying the fee, focus, effort, execution. Are you willing to pay the fee? And if you're willing to pay the fee of staying focused on the tiny details, on the minutiae, if you're willing to put in effort in every moment, not every other, not the ones where people are watching, every moment, and then above that, execute, which is not just do things with great intensity, but do things perfectly with great intensity, always, then you can be great. Not asking too much.
That's great advice. So then your career in the NBA, you were Houston Rockets and New York Knicks. How many more years was that after the Orlando Magics?
Orlando, Utah, Houston. So 6 years. That was the end of my career. Really, Houston, I got traded to New York and I never went there. I was in Houston. My family had come to Houston. My sister, one of my sisters, one of my good friends from Utah had come to, one of my sisters, one of my good friends from England, one of my good friends from Utah had come to Houston. It was, New Year's. So we were on a little break, 3 days off. And we're in the car. I've just come from practice. We're all in the car. We're heading somewhere to get food. And I get a call. And the call is from the coach, Jeff Van Gundy. And he says, John, I really respect what you've done. You've been a perfect teammate here. I hadn't really contributed on the floor as much, I'll be honest. They had just an amazing team, and I was not as amazing as they needed me to be. And he said, I wanted to let you know in person, not in person, but at least myself, that you've been traded to New York. And my sisters are listening on speakerphone in the car, my sister and my friends. And then I say, thanks, coach. Really appreciate you telling me. And I put the phone down. And we rode along in silence to this brunch place. And then, as we were getting towards it, I looked at them and smiled. And I said, I'm done. I'm retired. And that was it. I retired from sport.
If you're interested in working with me, contributing to the magazine, maybe speaking at any of our many events around the world, partnering or licensing The Best You, go to www.thebestyou.co.
Did you move back to England after that?
Yeah. I mean, England never stopped being a big part of my life. Once the season was over, I took a week of debriefing period where I went back I had a home in Arizona, where I went there and I would, meet up with my trainer and my physiologist guy who would, work on my stretching and stuff. And I'd spend a week with them, not doing very much work, but really just kind of tuning down from the season. And then I was back home. From this particular one, this was from my retirement. I got that call that it was New Year's Eve day. New Year's Eve day. New Year's Eve day, I got that call. We went out that night. and had an amazing, obliterated evening that I don't really remember much of. And within 48 hours, we were all back in England. It was great.
Brilliant. And you played for England?
I did. England has never really had a great team. We've had a couple of notable victories over the years. When I played, certainly when I was younger and I played, we beat Russia one year, which was fantastic and fluky. But then after I retired, I came out of retirement to play for the Commonwealth Games team. But that was only because I had a conversation with a government minister who will remain nameless, who said that essentially if we didn't win a medal in these games, they would not fund a basketball team for the Olympics. And so I was blackmailed into playing, because I don't play for fun. People expect me to. I don't play now. I haven't picked up a ball in...
That long?
I played in a charity game. I played 3 minutes in a charity game about 7 weeks ago. And prior to that, I have not picked up a ball in 4 years.
Wow.
Because it's not what I did for fun. It's what I did for work. And now I bike.
Now you bike.
Yeah.
So you spoke out about your sexuality. And was this in the US? And were you expecting a backlash?
Of course, there's always going to be a backlash in America. America's amazing in its ability to embrace oddness and yet at the same time, try and destroy it. And it has some problems with extremism. They wouldn't consider it extremism, but I think it's fairly extreme when you tell people that they're going to die and go to hell. Not necessarily in that order. And so I knew there'd be problems. I still, to this day, I probably get a letter every 3 months that somehow finds its way to me that tells me it's going to kill me. I get, on a weekly basis, I'll get an email or a tweet from somebody who says I should die or they would like to kill me.
Wow.
But this is the way of cowards, right? Cowards send emails, anonymous emails, to 6'9", 25 stone black guys. They don't walk up to them on the street and say
It's
that.
a wise move on their behalf, I suppose.
Wise but cowardly.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. People I don't like know I don't like them, and why. I always think it's just so cheap if you just throw it away and then you and your friends look at the email you sent, say, yes, I did one for the team. Team Righteousness got one here. Crazy.
And what do you reckon now? I mean, do you reckon there's more equality now in the NBA or in general in sports?
No, I mean, are things better? Yes. I mean, the odd part now is that England's actually lagging behind. And we have a major sport that could really influence culture and society, and yet doesn't, because the people involved in the sport are often more puerile than your average 8-year-old, more stereotyping than like a 70s sitcom. These are people who, never mind gay people. These are people who don't think women should do anything but serve them drinks on planes. These are people who think that, and I quote a member of the FA, think that Asians don't have the right number of fast-twitch muscle fibers. That's why they don't exist in the sport. I mean, these are people who don't think black people should do anything but play, and they certainly shouldn't migrate to managing, and they certainly shouldn't migrate after that into ownership. And I just think it's so regressive. When with very few changes, to just a few decision changes, they could be leaders within our country instead of the albatross around our neck.
Interesting. And now you advise all sorts of companies, blue chip companies, and with coaching. What is it you do? How do you help companies?
I'm an organizational psychologist, but I do a lot of consulting. More consulting than I thought I would, actually. I mean, it's not that I think I'm incapable in any way. It's simply all the stuff that happens is word of mouth. So it's often intriguing to me that people talk and in what seemingly unrelated industries, and suddenly you end up working with someone new. And it can be, a lot of leadership, a lot of talent development. I work with OD, organizational development, learning and development, and talent sides of organizations, HR and talent sides of organizations, because we all know that creating the right culture and climate where all talent can flourish is where it's at. Creating an organization that, without having to rely on tangible assets like money and bonuses, can attract and retain talent is where it's at. That leaders nowadays have to be more skilled because the base of people that they're working with is more diverse. And I don't just mean protected classes. I mean the way they think. There's work to do. When I worked in I work in a company still where I spoke to a very senior woman who I've heard talk before in her meetings with their direct reports. And she came into my room, the door shut, this big breath. And then she started talking, and I'm like, whoa, you're from Birmingham. And she said, yeah, that's not a problem, is it? And I was like, of course not, I'm from Manchester. I said, but... She said, yeah, they don't promote people from Birmingham here. So there's a woman in this organization. It's already hard enough to be a senior woman. It's already hard enough to be a woman in most of these corporate environments, professional services environments, who is spending 1.5%, maybe, let's call it that. 1.5% of her energy every day is spent sounding like she's somewhere generically London based. And that is energy that is unavailable to that company for brilliant decisions, for, snap judgments, for all the other amazing things that senior people have to do. And to me, that's why inclusion is important. Not so you can have a really good picture on your annual report of a white person next to a black person, next to a wheelchair, next to someone conceivably gay, but so that when really important decisions need to be made, all of a person's energy can be focused on that. I looked at her and I felt so sorry for her, because how exhausting must it be? Well, I know how exhausting it is to be someone else all day. It's exhausting.
And that's some of the advice that you provide companies in the structure and the organization and the equality.
Yeah, everything from policy on through to, the coaching is what I really love to do, simply because it's as close to, I know it's not therapy, I'm not confusing it, but it's as close to it as you get in this environment. And I just think the one-on-one contact and the idea that, especially with some of the senior folk that I work with, making them incrementally better makes 100, 1,000, 10,000 in some cases of the people who work for them have to work incrementally less hard and able to focus more on their tasks and duties. And that just makes an organization better tomorrow.
What's your attitude towards learning?
What's your attitude towards learning? I like learning. I said at the very beginning, I like constantly learning new things. I don't do any original research myself. That may change actually this year. I do a little bit with a school that I'm visiting lecture at. But I think there should never be a point where you just look at your toolkit of skills and you think, everything I need is there now. And I do treat very much my therapeutic / consultancy skills in the same way that I treated my basketball skills. There's a set of things that is entirely honed and polished that at any time I can use in the most trying of situations. There is a set of stuff that, whilst it's not my A game, it's certainly useful in certain discrete environments. And then I've got a set of stuff that I've heard about. All the new stuff in neuropsychology, and especially I think is interesting. But there's lots of different bits and pieces that you learn by working with colleagues and people from different disciplines. And you think, I don't know enough about them, but surely I can work on that, research that, read enough research to push that, at least one of those little skills, over to this area where it's in my tool case to use. And that's how I treat learning. Every year there's something, there's something out there that I can gather, which is why I try and gather colleagues around me to learn from their best practice.
And you were talking about discipline, and it's a generalization here, but what do you think that if anything, is wrong with society? I mean, are we lacking discipline?
That's a small question.
Yeah.
What's wrong with society?
If anything, I'm just saying, are we lacking discipline?
No. I mean, I am big on personal responsibility. I think it's really important. We're lacking people who can attend to details every day. We do not teach our people, our young people especially. We don't teach them how to tackle the small details every day, pay the fee, right? We don't honestly tell them how boring some of it's going to be. And we don't help them create that future history to see why all this boring stuff is going to be worth it. I mean, I still reflect on my maths class and learning stuff about waveforms and wave particle duality and thinking, how is this important? How is this important? I'm not saying it's not interesting, but how is it important? And nobody except my mother was there to say, you see that thing you have? Look past, when I was 17, look past the basketball that you know is going to be the temporary next 20 years. Look past it to the next 20 years when this qualification, this A-level, will be essential for your pursuit there. And I don't think we have many young people who have that advice coming from their school, never mind from their parents. And then there's also the fact that nobody seems to want to admit that we live in a very unfair society, that there is a computer program right now that's been developed. I'm not sure who it's been developed with. I want to say UCL, but I don't think that's right. And another university in America, that if you pop in your postcode in England or your zip code in America, it'll tell you what your income at 30 is going to be. Now, all of a sudden, we have to stop lying about, it's about lazy. Poor people are poor because they're lazy. Or as someone I heard on television on Sunday say, they're impoverished of spirit, which is absurd. But rather, we have to understand that if you're from a certain part of East London, if you're from a certain part of North or South or whatever London, if you're from a certain part of Manchester or a certain part of Baltimore or New York, there's a good chance that your teacher is more interested in getting home safe than teaching you maths. There's a good chance that you leave your house every day without eating breakfast, which we know has massive knock-on ramifications. There's a good chance that your mother didn't eat the right food when you were in her womb, and that when you were born, she never read to you. So we know by age 2, there's differentiators between your developmental outlook, your educational attainment outlook, and your future financial outlook right there built in. That is nothing to do with how hard you work or whether you're willing to pay the fee. And I think society can't move forward until we have politicians who understand this and recognize that some of the failures we see in individuals and in groups of people is actually based in systemic issues, not in individual idiosyncrasies.
Very interesting. And true.
I've got to find a politician to give that entire diatribe to.
So, I mean, I was actually going to ask you about the educational system, but I think you replied there. What do you think then your best assets are? Or what do you think has allowed you to achieve what you managed to achieve?
I'm smiling because in my head, it's awful. In my head, I just said my big sexy brain. I don't know where I've heard that, but I've heard that somewhere. And not of me. It is my brain. You know, it's weird. I get on my bike in the morning. I 3 days a week, I ride at 5 o'clock because I'm afraid of traffic. And I put my helmet on, and every time I put my helmet on, I was like, it doesn't matter. If I fall and break a limb, pull a ligament, whatever else, that doesn't matter. This is the only thing that matters. It's my one good asset. You know, I've got bad knees. 4% body fat is a long time ago. But my brain still surprises me. And I say this because I want to take no credit for it. I really don't mean my education. I really don't mean my desire for learning or reading. None of that stuff. I really mean that 40% of the time, I shouldn't say this, People stop paying me. 40% of the time, someone will present me with a unique, challenging, obscure problem that I will not be able to reach into any of the usual bags of learned expertise. And if I sit quietly for a moment and don't try and engage the mechanisms, I will say something that will make great sense 9 times out of 10 and be on the path to the solution. And I'm convinced that has nothing to do with my education, because they don't seem to pull from those bags. There's nothing, about humanism and what I learned in San Diego doing my master's there. There's nothing no. It's not that. It's not Penn State organizational psychology. No, none of that stuff. It just appears. And that's a pretty cool talent. I can't jump, I'm slow, and I eat too much. But my brain, 40% of the time, it just saves the day.
Well, that's brilliant. That's probably the best asset to have.
Yeah.
My last question to you, John. Many years from now, what would you like your legacy to be?
I adopted kids. I've got 2 boys, and I've got 5 grandchildren. I've got 2 nieces, 2 nephews, and 2 sisters. That I've done right by them is really important. And that I've done net good. I know I screw up. But at the end of it, if I've done net good and left behind me something better than 70 years of fossil fuel emissions, I've done all right.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for watching Inspiring People. Thank you.
For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co.